Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365.com podcast, looking back at last weekend's Belgian Grand Prix and also looking forwards to the much needed summer break. From Racing News 365.com, my name is Nick Golding and I'm joined as always by 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam Coop, and the absolute legend, and I'll explain why in a moment, as always, lead editor Ian Parks. Now, we've got to start because for those who are watching this on YouTube, will be wondering, where the hell is Ian? Well, he has had an interesting journey back from Spa-Francorchamps. He's currently in a pub, and you know what? It is a beautiful day here in England. He absolutely deserves it. He has got a drink in his hand, and you know what? If anyone deserves a drink right now, it is that fine man, Ian. How are you? Because you've had a long weekend, and from the sounds of it, an interesting journey home so far.
Yeah, major crash on the M11 coming north out of London City Airport, which has meant I've had to take a diverted route around to try and avoid that. And I've stopped off at a lovely pub in Cambridgeshire en route called Coach and Horses. Very nice it is indeed, but I need the Wi-Fi to try and give us a stable podcast recording because we've had so many issues in the past, of course. So here I am, sat in the pub, pint in hand, got a buy a pint, can't just use the Wi-Fi for free, of course. And yeah, lovely day outside, as you say, Nick. Just part of my travels, as always.
The Coach and Horses, if you're listening, we're more than happy to do a live show for you guys. Sam, you've also brought a show and tell for you today. For those watching on YouTube, I intro you every single time as the 2023 Young Journalist of the Year because that is what you are. Do you want your moment to show the prize that you have?
God, I don't think I've done a show and tell since I was in primary school. But yeah, I thought I'd bring conclusive proof that I have actually got the award. So for anyone who listens to the podcast and doubts the veracity of Nick's claims that he makes every week, he is actually telling the truth.
So for those who are listening, if this is ever a reason to watch the podcast on YouTube, it is now to see Ian with a drink in hand and Sam with his trophy. Look, enough about that. As funny as it is, we've got so much to talk about because the Belgian Grand Prix during and after the race delivered so many storylines. And we've got to start with Mercedes. It looked like a 60th 1-2 for them with George Russell taking the checker flag in first, unexpectedly so, followed by Lewis Hamilton. However, 3 hours after the race, George was disqualified for his car being 1.5 kilograms below the legal minimum weight. Since then, obviously, Toto Wolff has come out and obviously apologised to George, saying that it was an error by Mercedes. Ian, it's a very, very big error for Mercedes to make. And actually, when you think about it, a very rare one as well.
Yeah, I think, looking back now, Nick, I think they were really caught off guard by what happened in Friday practice because we had dry weather, sunshine, warm track, and all the data, all the information that was coming out of Friday practice following two, really good, solid sessions was that the race, given the high tire wear from what they were seeing across those two sessions, was going to be a two-stop race. But as Sunday's Grand Prix unfolded, despite the higher air temperature, despite the higher track temperature of about 42 degrees compared to Friday, somehow the tyres were holding on. Now, Mercedes in particular, theirs is an unusual case because they came into the Grand Prix weekend with an upgrade. They brought in a new floor. They decided, however, that after Friday running, that they would change the floor on the cars, go back to a previous spec. When doing so, they also made additional changes that were more set up towards the race rather than Saturday because they knew it was going to be a wet Saturday. So they were compromising grid position to a certain extent for the fact that they were going to be race pace ready. But of course, as I say, those changes on board, they also then, during the race, saw that actually the tyre wear was nowhere near as high as they'd witnessed on Friday. And as the laps ticked by, George was getting more and more comfortable with the tyres. The team were not seeing that the rubber was not degrading as it was on Friday. So ultimately, the bottom line And as George discussed, over about a 3-lap period, as he mentioned in the post-race press conference on Sunday, there was this back and forth between the team, and they thought, let's go for it. Let's go for one stop, even though everybody else around them was doing 2 stops. George ended up doing 34 laps on a set of hard tyres. Quite a feat. Even Mario Isola, the Pirelli Motorsport boss, thought that was not going to be likely. But as has since emerged, it would appear that doing 34 laps on that one set of hard tyres wore the rubber down so much that it's played its part in the car being underweight. If they'd have gone for a traditional 2-stop, more than likely they would have been okay. But even Mario Isola has turned around and confirmed that running the rubber for so long, bearing in mind we're talking about all 4 corners in the power styles, you've got four tyres, would have at least led to more than a kilo of weight being shed from that car. There are other things behind this as well. I'm sure Mercedes has also made some sort of error somewhere, but that will more than likely come out with the investigation, which we know they will or are now, Monday afternoon, currently conducting into exactly why that car was 1.5 kilograms.
And that's what... go on, Sam.
I was going to say, could it also be the lack of cool-down lap at Spa? Because you obviously usually pick up rubber, and Spa, being a long circuit, they don't have a cool-down lap. They come straight to the pits. So could that have also played a part in the lack of weight?
Yeah, Nick and I did discuss that on the F1 update on Sunday post-race. However, the teams will already be aware of that. So they would have taken all their calculations, they would have taken that into the calculation, basically, with regard to the weight come the end of a Grand Prix. Just to clarify, for those that may not be aware, regulations state car plus driver, once fuel is extracted for the mandatory fuel sample that takes place after a Grand Prix, has to be 798 kilograms. And a car was weighed initially before the fuel was extracted. It was banged on 798 kilograms. Once the fuel was extracted, it was 796.5. So yeah, whilst that, just getting back directly to you, Sam, whilst that was theorized post-race, as it's since transpired, it almost certainly every team up and down the pit lane would have taken the fact that there would be no marbles pickup around the 7 kilometers, no cool down lap, warm down lap, whatever you want to describe it. So yes, whilst that would have added weight to the car with all those marbles around the worn tyres, it is something that would have ordinarily been taken into the team's calculations. So more than reasonably, it didn't have any effect. What did have the majority of the effect was the fact they ran for 34 laps on the hard tyres, and there was enough rubber worn off those tyres that played its part in the fact that the car was underweight. But also, we've got to seem to think that there might have been something else at play, which the team, as I say, is investigating. They've apologised for. Ron Meadows, the team manager, even conceded during the post-race stewards briefing with the stewards that an error had been made, and their team apologised for it. So we've just got to wait to see what exactly was that.
What's so extraordinary about this whole thing is, regardless of the disqualification, the fact that George did complete the 1 stop, something else Fernando Alonso did as well, because ahead of the race, a lot of the drivers and teams were saying that potentially even 3 stops were going to be required. Of course, the vast majority did 2. The thing that's really interesting is obviously something you touched on, Ian, that those who did only 1 stop were almost finding more grip and finding more confidence in the car the longer they ran the tyres, something quite rare, because typically we see the tyres going off and times reducing. Lewis Hamilton, in his prior to his second pit stop, was saying to the team that he was happy with the tyres. They were still in good condition, but of course was brought in for a second pit stop to cover Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris. Sam, Lewis seemed a bit disgruntled with the strategists after the race. Of course, despite the fact he's inherited victory, do you think there'll be a sense of frustration that he wasn't allowed to do, it seems, the one stop?
Maybe slightly, but as Toto Wolff said after the race, that will be discussed with the team. It was explained to Lewis as to kind of how that transpired. So I think there's always a little bit of a sense of, oh, how come that was afforded to my teammate but not me? They are, after all, your closest competitor, but I think he will have seen the kind of the realities of the situation, and he's an experienced driver. He would have accepted those, and also ultimately, it's what's culminated in him winning the race. We don't know that he wouldn't have had a similar issue had he run the one stop. So actually, it's
Very
probably
true.
turned out for his benefit.
Anything tied on Lewis, Ian?
The same as Grumpy. It's one of those things, isn't it? It's the team rolled the dice in the end with George, and for all of 90 minutes, bear in mind when the checker flag fell to the stewards announcing that or the technical delegate confirming that there had been an infringement with the W15 of George. For all of 90 minutes, it looked like the team and George, the play were absolutely blind, but it was a genius fall. And for all of Lewis's chasing towards the end of the race, and that's probably where his drunkenness lay, more than the fact that they didn't give him the one-stop opportunity. I think the fact that he couldn't get past George over those final 3-4 laps probably irked him more than the fact that he didn't get the one-stop, because bottom line was he was on far fresher rubber and George considerably fresher rubber, of course. It was about 16 laps different. But it was the fact that Spa-Francorchamps, as we saw, proved really difficult to overtake compared to previous seasons. We knew going into the weekend, of course, that the DRS detection point had been shortened, so it meant that going down the Camel Straight into the chicane at the end, as I say, the DRS zone was shorter, so they hit that zone at a later time than they had done in the previous couple of editions, and that's why it looked, or it was anyway, far more difficult to overtake in this particular race than it had been in previous years. So I think just that Lewis's grumpiness was probably the fact that he couldn't get much George, because we do know Lewis loved them overtake.
Well, I think ultimately it's fair to say that with 3 wins in the last 4 races, Mercedes are definitely back. It's quite incredible they've won 3 of the last 4. When you think of where they've been, not only at the start of this season, but actually the last 2 years. Let's move on to a team who have dominated the sport for the past 2.5 seasons, but have got potentially one of the biggest calls to make ahead of the second half of the season. That is, of course, Red Bull. Very contrasting fortunes, Sam, on either side of the garage. Max Verstappen obviously started in 11th, did brilliantly to recover to 4th, given how difficult overtaking was, has extended his lead in the standings over Lando Norris to 78 points. On the other side of the garage, Sergio Perez started on the front row. Ian and myself sung his praises in the F1 update because he finally delivered in a qualifying session. However, tumbled down the order of the race, really struggled for pace, complained about the car, could only finish 7th. You've got Max, who is clearly excelling in the RB20 and has called for more from Red Bull, whereas you have Sergio Perez, who at the moment it looks like could well cost the team the Constructors' Championship. McLaren are only 42 points behind now. We know there's a test on Wednesday, a TPC test with Liam Lawson and Daniel Ricciardo, and there could be a chance potentially one of those could replace Sergio Perez. The big question, do you think Sergio Perez will be in that Red Bull alongside Max Verstappen for the Dutch Grand Prix when summer ends?
It's a good question.
It's the big question for the summer.
I'm really on the fence with it.
Share your thoughts.
I think in my heart of hearts, I think he will be, but he shouldn't be. I think it's run its course. I think what happened yesterday at Spa should have been the final act in his Red Bull career. And I think what we've seen with Sergio is over a weekend, it's almost like a kind of dichotomy almost, where he can't string together a consistent weekend. Usually he has a poor qualifying and he then has a race where he kind of comes through the field. And yes, he came through the field on Sunday, but the other way. And that isn't what we're used to from Perez. So it was quite a peculiar weekend for him in that sense. But also in qualifying, he only just got into Q3
Yeah.
by the narrowest of margins. He almost had another kind of I was going to say oopsie, but that I think is maybe underplaying the severity of his lack of delivery on Saturdays, generally speaking. So yeah, I think for whatever reason, Red Bull know that they should replace him. And that's what this Wednesday test is starting to be billed as, even if they're downplaying it, as they obviously would do. But I think just what Sergio brings in terms of sponsorship, in terms of the stability he has in that relationship with Max, I think they're going to look big picture here and think, do we really want to upset the apple cart at this stage? Could it cause tensions? Could we not at least speak to Sergio, have this meeting that is, this post-Spa meeting that has been touted as the kind of make or break moment for Perez, see how he gets on at Zandvoort. I wouldn't be surprised if the change is made further into the year, if it gets to a really critical point where they go, we can no longer afford to lose any more points.
But it's already critical.
40 is a reasonable margin still.
But the big thing you say there, the big thing quickly, then I'll hand it to you, Ian, is that obviously you mentioned there, Sam, that Red Bull might not want to disrupt the camp. Max seems to have the Drivers' Championship under control. A 78-point lead in the driver is a huge margin. Effectively, he will need 3 races without scoring a point, something that is highly unlikely to happen. Of course, it could, but very unlikely. In the constructors, it is a completely different story. Despite Lando Norris only finishing 5th, Oscar Piastri was 2nd. They have 2 drivers on red hot form. All of a sudden, they are only 42 points behind. Sergio is clearly costing them massively. And this is the point, Ian, that even if it were, for example, to disrupt the camp, Red Bull have to realise now that actually the money is in the Constructors' Championship, and that is where they are at a severe risk of losing their title defence.
Yeah.
I'm just going to throw this at you guys. 28 points in the last 8 races. It says it all. 28 points Checo Perez has scored in the last 8 Grand Prix. So we're already at the critical juncture. But this is why there is talks of taking bets. Bottom line. The offset for Red Bull is how much money will they lose if they finish 2nd or 3rd in the Constructors' Championship to the payoff they're going to have to give Checo for the remainder of his contract for this season and his 1 year the next season. Because, of course, as we all know, he signed early June, we signed a new 1+1. So 1 year guaranteed next year with an option on either side for 2026. So that's a 1.5 years that they're going to have to pay him off so they go to that contract. Unless it's all the Mexican sponsorship money for what is more prestigious to the team. Just holding on to a driver and thinking about the financial aspect, or retaining it for the Constructors' title, which, as you all know, means the world to every single man and woman that works for any Formula One team. Yes, it's great to have a driver's champion, but for the 1,000+ personnel that operate within the majority of these Formula One teams, being crowned Constructors' champions means everything. There's going to be a little bit of selfishness as well associated with that, because I know for a fact that many teams operate a bonus structure depending on where they finish in the Constructors' Championship. So you can imagine for somebody that might only be on 40,000 that's working them for Red Bulls, regardless of whatever position they've got. Can you imagine a 10 or 15% bonus on top of that per annum? It would mean a lot. I mean, I'm talking semantics here with regard to that, but it's everything that's got to be taken into consideration with regards. Because, as I say, the Constructors' Championship means so much to so many. That's what they strive for at the end of the day, to be crowned the Constructors' Champion. But as I say, having Max as Drivers' Champion is brilliant, but it's being that number 1 team and having no bragging rights as well over real competitors. So, look, for me, there's a lot going into what's taking place on Wednesday. It's a filming day. primarily that's what it was arranged for. But in the background as well, it was initially arranged for Liam Lawson to take part in a TPC run. TPC is basically where they have to drivers run 2-year-old. And it was just what we're going to be building up, as I say, Liam's knowledge, Liam's development. But now we now know Daniel Ricciardo is going to be running as well from the 2-year-old car. Here's a question for you. If there was not going to be any side-by-side comparison as to how those two drivers compete in the 2-year-old car, what on earth is the point in having Daniel Ricciardo running in it? What has he got to gain? Yeah, is in this year's car is going to carry over into 25. But that's sort of no point in him running the 2022 AlphaTauri. Doesn't make any sense. So, without a shadow of a doubt, guys, this is a side-by-side comparison, and it's going to give Red Bull the opportunity to then evaluate, do we put one of those two in this year's Red Bull for the remaining 10 Grand Prix? And I will hold my hand up, sorry folks, F1 update on Sunday evening, I said 11, made a mistake. It is just 10 Grand Prix remaining alongside Max Verstappen to ensure they get the constructors' points that they need to continue to be constructors' champions.
So I'm going to push you then, Ian, because Sam gave his opinion. Do you think Sergio will be racing for Red Bull in the Dutch Grand Prix?
No. Bottom line.
Straight to
Helmut
it.
Marko's,
and of course,
Helmut Marko's comments. I was just going to say Helmut Marko's comments said it all. Post Belgian Grand Prix, Helmut gave him a little bit of praise on Saturday, as pretty much everybody did, but we all know points are won on a Sunday. Helmut turned around and said the Checo during that race, quote unquote, completely collapsed. That's a huge statement to make. Huge statement. And that pretty much says it all. We know there's this talks taking place. We know that there's a side-by-side comparison. Come on, guys. There's no way Checo can be in that car in the Dutch Grand Prix.
No, I agree with you. I think it'll be a different driver come the Dutch Grand Prix. And I suppose the interesting thing then is what that means for Checo's future. Because he then enters, the driver market, will a team decide to snap him up given his experience? So will that be the end of his F1 career? And I guess that's the bigger question. Ian's nodding, so I think Sam's nodding as well. And I agree. I think that's probably the end. One team, though, that is going to be watching what is happening very, very closely is McLaren, because they recognise that Sergio is currently Red Bull's weakness. It's mostly because of Sergio they have managed to take so many points out of Red Bull's advantage. They'll be really interested to see how Red Bull deal with this, and if they do replace Sergio, who is the driver that takes his place. Because actually, if a driver comes in to replace Checo and does a very good job, that will effectively take McLaren potentially out of the Constructors' Championship. McLaren, it's not necessarily a case that they're going to defeat Red Bull, because for them, Sam, a lot seems to ride on who is going to replace Checo if he is replaced.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that classic, it's not in McLaren's hands. Red Bull still have the advantage. McLaren still need to outscore them over the remaining 10 Grand Prix. So it's not something that McLaren can control, and they wouldn't have been able to control it anyway in that sense. Their guys are going to go out and perform the best they can week in, week out. And they've had a very, very good run. And I imagine they'll continue to have a very, very good run. But yeah, if Red Bull can put someone in the car who can at least hold that gap steady, can at least match whatever, let's call it Oscar Piastri as the second driver at McLaren, but we know that they're both competing at a very high level. They just need to have a net off that offset, basically. Because Max, you can probably, I think it's fair to guess over the next 10 races will outscore Lando. You'd expect, or it'll be at least close. So that second driver just needs to be able to match what Oscar's doing in that sense.
But go on, Sam.
Oh, that was
well, because that's a really interesting point you've just mentioned about Oscar being the number 2 driver. Because actually, since his kind of first real blip in F1 around the Spanish Grand Prix, he's been on red hot form. Of course, he won in Hungary. He's obviously then at a podium, second place in Belgium. And Lando made a mistake in Belgium that really cost him a charge for a potential podium at the first corner. And actually, Ralf Schumacher, obviously the XF1 driver, came out with some really interesting quotes to Sky Germany, where he said that Lando needs to get on top of his little mistakes quickly, because Oscar is a very different style of driver. He's quite calm, cool, and collected, whereas, as we've seen with Lando, he is still very self-critical. Perhaps, it almost shows a chink in his armor almost. Do you think, Ian, that actually the whole thing about a number one, number two McLaren actually is going to be a fascinating storyline for the second half of the season, because Oscar, in his current form, is taking points out of Lando?
No, McLaren, as I
So I
do,
was
there
just
is no.
say just
Yeah.
So I was just going to say, just for the context there as well, over the last 8 races, Piastri has outscored Lando by 10 points. So he's scored 126. And for reference, that's 98 more than Sergio Perez in that period.
But this then showed how potentially how critical Lando's little mistakes are. It was such a small mistake on the exit of the first corner of the Belgian Grand Prix, where he just flicked up some gravel but dropped from 4th to 7th and never really recovered because overtaking was so difficult. Oscar made a great start, had exceptional pace, and actually since his early season blip around the Spanish Grand Prix, he's been building in performance race after race, and now he's almost a driver you would expect to be featuring on the podium. It feels that could change the dynamic in McLaren slightly, given that Lando perhaps might need to accept that actually the Drivers' Championship isn't on. It's the constructors they need to work on, because Oscar is likely to start taking points out of Lando, as he has been, as Sam mentioned.
Apologies for any background noise, folks. I'm in the pub, so if you can hear any little background voices, do apologise. I'm going to come back to your original question about number 1 and number 2. Knowing McLaren as I do, that is not the case at the moment. They've got their 2 drivers that are currently free to race, free to score points. Until it gets to any particular point in the season, and Andrea Stella has confirmed this, till it gets to any particular point in the season where one driver might have an advantage over the other, if they're within range of Max going for the driver's title, then until that, there's going to be no priority, number 1 and number 2. With regards to Lando specifically, he knows himself, and he said it post-race in the media pen on Sunday after the Belgian Grand Prix, that he needs a reset. He's made, quote-unquote, again, stupid, silly mistakes. It's what he's been doing over these few Grand Prix now, and he knows it's costing valuable points. He will be so much closer to Max right now than the current points gap that there is. If he hadn't have made these silly, stupid mistakes, he'd probably be 50-odd points, maybe. Might have got a 20-odd gained on what he currently is at the minute, I would estimate. So he knows...
Big difference.
So, big difference, yeah, big difference. Of course it's a big difference. So, and that would have added also a big difference to the Constructors' Championship as well, when you think about it. They'd be even closer than the current 42-point gap between Red Bull and McLaren right now. So he knows, just as Checo Perez has not scored the points he should have done for Red Bull, and by the way, starting second in Belgium and not converting that into at least the podium, again, another big black mark against him. So Lando knows that these are valuable points that have gone missing over these past few Grand Prix because of these silly, stupid mistakes. Hopefully, he does have this reset, and he comes back fresh with a clear mind, clear perspective, and he produces the kind of result that we know he can, because for me, he does currently have the edge over Oscar, both in qualifying and in race pace. But Oscar is delivering, as you've mentioned it, because of his character and personality, the more stable, steady, consummate drives that Lando is currently lacking on a consistent basis.
And the thing that's also really interesting with that is, had Lando not made these small mistakes and was closer to Max, then actually that then throws it back onto McLaren to potentially have to introduce a number 1 and number 2 sooner than they may have liked, because that would put Lando in so much more of a potential championship fight. You mentioned there the word reset, and there is a whole team that probably needs a bit of a reset, and that is Ferrari. Of course, Charles Leclerc did inherit a podium due to George's disqualification, so did get third. Carlos Sainz was down in sixth. It's been a really difficult second half to the first half of the season, if that makes any sense. Ferrari were the team in the opening rounds taking the fight to Red Bull. We saw what Carlos did in Australia. Okay, Max retired there. We also saw what Charles did in Monaco. Really, since Monaco, it has just been a real struggle for Ferrari. Of course, Charles did master the wet conditions in a way to claim pole. Of course, Max was 6 tenths of a second faster, but Ferrari have got a lot of questions to ask themselves during the summer, and even Charles Leclerc did seem a bit downbeat given that he initially had finished fourth.
Yeah, it's been a really difficult period for them, and even I think in some ways it goes back to Imola, where they brought that big upgrade package, and everyone was kind of everyone was throwing these numbers out in terms of how much it's worth per lap, and Carlos Sainz really tried to shut that down. And he was like, no, we can't play this game. Like, we don't know. The proof is whatever it delivers on track. You can't just say, oh yeah, it's worth this much on paper, and then deliver. And since then, yes, Monaco was a great result for them, but it was not a very power. It's a completely not a power centric circuit. It's not critical in that sense. They've really, really been struggling just to get the pace out of the car. Its upgrade package has taken them down a certain direction. The numbers that they're seeing in that path are not correlating to what they're then seeing on track, and they're lost as to how to unlock that pace. They don't know what they need to mechanically do to get the upgrades working in the way they want them to, but also I don't think they know whether or not they've taken it down the right philosophical route when it comes to the upgrades as well. So they're having to kind of walk that back, and we've seen that over the last few Grand Prix where they've returned to previous specs and then started rebuilding onto the car to see where that can go. And there has been some positive developments. Charles had a really good race in Hungary. He had a strong performance. It was very, very strong on Saturday at Spa. To deliver what was a front row start that was then obviously converted into pole with Max's penalty. In the race, he kind of knew that it was going to be a damage limitation exercise for him, that it was going to be holding on as best he could at a circuit that usually there is plentiful overtaking. Obviously, the DRS situation's changed that slightly, and I think that was to his advantage. But yeah, I think it's very, very difficult for Ferrari to identify, and that's why we're seeing this kind of knock-on effect, this lag time between them realizing there's an issue and then developing those changes, because there's fundamentally something wrong in the direction they've taken this car.
Guys, before everyone disappears, the first half of the season is done, which means we need to do our biggest takeaway from the opening 14 rounds of the 2024 F1 season. And you know what? I'm going to go first. I've thrown this on both of you. I'll give you a few seconds to think. I think the biggest takeaway for me this season so far has been the quite sad collapse of Sergio Perez. We've seen last year the way he goes through these difficult periods of form, but this one just feels different. He had the chance in the Belgian Grand Prix in particular to bounce back, did so in qualifying. You kind of felt that was his moment to show he does belong in F1 and with Red Bull. And I think it's quite sad to have seen the way he struggled this year after starting very positively. And you've got to remember, he's actually still an excellent racing driver. Of course, famously won a race for Racing Point. I still have seen the Sakhir Grand Prix, still remember that one. And just his recovery drives as well at times from, towards the back of the grid to the high point scoring finishes. I think it's a sad situation because he's a very good driver, actually gives some very good answers to questions as well. And I think whilst we believe he will leave Red Bull and obviously leave F1, I think it's just sad the way that his season's gone and what the inevitable future looks for him. Sam, for you, biggest takeaway of the first half of the season?
I think that was a great answer, Nick. I think that's a really fair point. It is, it's difficult to see, isn't it? But I think for me, a more positive one is that, well, first of all, I think we're going to be in for a brilliant 18 months in F1. And it's almost a shame that we've got new regulations coming in 2026 now. It's the closer we get, the more we're kind of going, oh. But for me, the biggest take home for the first 14 races is that you just simply cannot forecast development curves in F1 at the moment. You just do not know how it will transpire, how things will play out. 3 races into the year, we thought this is done. Red Bull, it's unassailable. They are by far the dominant outfit. Even with diminishing returns when it comes to development, no one will catch them. How wrong we all were. So for me, the biggest take home is that there's almost no point trying to predict. You've just got to enjoy what is turning out to be an incredibly entertaining season.
That's an excellent point, because Ian and I, in the first F1 update after the Bahrain Grand Prix, kind of ruled this season out as just being a dominant Red Bull year. How wrong were we? Ian, bring us home. Your biggest takeaway from the first half of the season?
That's a good point that Sam as well. Actually, both make really good points. One, yours and Checo, Nick, and yours, Sam, on where we are in the state of play with F1 at the minute. It is absolutely fascinating that we're going to be going remaining 10 Grand Prix pretty much into each one of those, arguably not knowing who's going to come out of it as the winner. And that's what we love, isn't it, guys, about Formula One so much. We want that unpredictability. We don't, for all intents and purposes, while a dominant car and driver, is something to behold on occasion, because you just have to, say well done for what you've done, or what you have done and what you are doing. But what we want is that unpredictability, as I say, and that's why I think we're loving Formula One at the minute. I think that's why we're doing so well with the page views on the website, but we're doing so well with our numbers on the YouTube page and on our podcast, our listens as well, because people are excited by what's going on at the minute, because it is just so interesting. So come to you direct, Nick, with regards to my takeaway. For me, you both answered really well, and I could have easily thrown those into the mix. For me, it's the fact that Mercedes has come bouncing back when, by their own admission, they were not expecting this. If you'd have told anybody at Mercedes after that pre-season test in Bahrain that come the summer break, you will have won 3 of the last 4 Grand Prix, pretty much I would have assumed everybody inside Mercedes would have just looked at you as if you'd gone stark stone raving mad. But they are going into the summer break having won 3 of the last 4 Grand Prix. Yes, George Russell's was inherited, bearing in mind the crash between Lando and Max in Austria, of course. But without make no mistake, the win in Silverstone was on merit, and the win in Belgium was on merit. They still want to, okay, yes, it was Lewis that got the victory because George was disqualified, but it was still a win on merit, regardless of that particular fact. And of course, for all of those Hamilton fans, they will be absolutely over the moon that they will have seen their star man back to winning ways, when they potentially thought that he was going to end his this wonderful Mercedes career, just pretty much petering out on his way to Ferrari. Well, he hasn't. That win at Silverstone, for those that were there, for those that watched on TV, will live long in the memory, simply because of the outpouring of emotion from Lewis. So it's great to see Mercedes back in the mix, which then goes back to Sam's point as well, that we have this unpredictability and this great fascination at the moment that we're going into a Grand Prix weekend and we don't know who's going to come out the winner. So it's just great at the minute that we're ending this first part of the season on such a high, and with so much to look forward to going into these last 10 races.
Some amazing takeaways. And of course, for those who are watching this podcast on YouTube, let us know your thoughts on anything we've discussed, and also your biggest takeaway of the season so far in the comment section below. It would be amazing to hear from you all, as always. And whilst I'm talking to you viewers, it's a massive thing for us to say thank you to you, because as Ian mentioned, views this season across page views, video views, podcast views are doing incredibly well. And that's only thanks to you guys tuning in, week out, day after day, to hearing us three talk about the world of Formula One and everything going on in it. The summer break, enjoy it. We're going nowhere. There'll still be content throughout the summer. from Ian, Sam, and myself, this has been the latest episode of the Racing News 365.com podcast. Enjoy your summer. See you later.
Cheers, folks. And before anybody comments, it's a pint of bitter shandy, which means it's half lemonade, half bitter. So I am not drinking and driving. I am not over the limit, just in case anybody posts a comment. Take care, folks, as always.
Thanks for joining us.